Keeping pace with innovation increasingly means learning to cross boundaries, to live and work with diversity. And that's increasingly the focus at MIT Professional Education, with a diverse student body and courses given on multiple continents in multiple languages. In recognition for that, the director of the program was recently honored with a national award from the University Professional and Continuing Education Association. And we'd like to welcome that director, Bhaskar Pant. Thank you very much for being with us, Bhaskar.
Thank you, Chris, and thanks for inviting me. I look forward to talking with you.
Bhaskar, diversity is not just your current job at MIT. This is something that goes back to when you were growing up, part of the Indian diaspora in Africa. But you didn't just have diversity, you also lived with segregation. So tell us how you process those two things simultaneously.
Yeah, well, and so that's a good question in the sense that I didn't really come to MIT to introduce diversity. There were people coming from all over the world to MIT already, so that was nothing terribly new. But what I wanted to relate to and bring about is in fact, the ability to take our programs to where the populations lived. In other words, addressing the needs of the people in the context of their livelihood where they were living, rather than coming to MIT to learn something. And both have their own places. But in any case, where you asked me about my roots, and yes, I was born in Southern Africa, in fact, in Zambia specifically, which was formerly Northern Rhodesia. And because it had remnants of, or maybe I shouldn't even say remnants, but extension of the South African apartheid system, it was basically races that had their own residential areas, their own schooling, and so on and so forth. That's how I grew up. So I basically, as you rightly said, I come from the Indian community in Africa, or in Southern Africa, and so we lived in an area that was designated for Indians, if you like, quite separate from Europeans, as we call them, or whites, and then Africans or blacks had their own areas. So that is truly racial separation. That's how I grew up. Quite frankly, I thought it was quite normal, because that's when you grow up, you don't know any different. But in any case, it arouses your curiosity as to why that system exists and what the other side is doing and what is so different about them. So diversity becomes part and parcel of you in terms of not only curiosity, but the fact that you also have teachers from different parts of the world, although mainly from South Africa and the UK, and then some from India, because they brought in teachers from India to teach, if you like, Indians, which was a strange way of looking at it, in the sense that where does it say that knowledge only resides in the kind of people that you look like you? But anyway, it's just to say that would really seem odd in the context of the United States. But that was normal where I grew up. And so when I ended up at MIT after many, many stops and living on 4 continents and working for a diverse set of companies and organizations, it was something that was part and parcel of me to say, okay, so now why don't we address the needs of people that live differently, that think differently than you do? And that's where diversity and inclusion came into my way of organizing our programs and the audiences that we cater to.
Now, at MIT, you're in a program that deals with professionals, maybe some of them even at mid-career, and they're trying to catch up or move forward. And we can easily understand how that deals with technological advances, but where does diversity come in for people like that?
Well, again, when you talk about technology, the implementation of technology is not necessarily uniform everywhere. Let's say you have water filtration systems that you've come up with some ideas at MIT, and that's just something rudimentary. But the fact is, the way it would work in the United States, how you implement it, the way you would implement it in Zambia, where I grew up, etc., would be different. Why is that? Well, the context is different. The cultural aspects are different. The conditions around you, and both environmental, governmental, etc., all of those are different. So when you implement something, and that may be a technology, and the end result may be a good one, but the fact is that if you do it the way you would do it in the United States, it probably would be a major failure, or non-acceptance, or any number of things that particularly apply in health-related technologies specifically. But in any case, I gave you an example of something where you would think it's universal. After all, everybody wants to drink clean water. Well, that's true, but how you deliver it, how you present it, it all depends on the cultural context.
I know when you started work at this program at MIT, maybe you were not trying to increase diversity because there was a lot of it already there, but things happened in this program. I mean, the makeup of the student body itself, what was that like for you? And how did you process that when you saw this change happening?
Well, it wasn't so much the change was happening. We actually instituted the change. What do I mean by that? Well, we decided that we wanted to not only have programs, our programs go overseas, as opposed to people coming from overseas. So we took them to Asia, we took them to the Middle East, we took them to Africa. And our faculty, which was Boston or Cambridge based, got familiar with some of those contexts that I was referring to as to how is technology implemented, how is it thought about, those kinds of challenges. So we went abroad, that's one. And two, we decided also to really target certain populations around the world, particularly more lately when we went online and we could have that global audience almost automatically or almost instantly. Then the issue was, why don't we target certain populations? And well, how do we do that? Well, we decided to do it in multiple languages. So there are a lot of people who speak English around the world, obviously, but there are a lot of people, a lot more people who speak other languages other than English. And so we decided to start out with Europe, with starting out in Spanish, which is a very widely spoken language, not only in Europe, but in Latin America and elsewhere. And then Portuguese, because Portuguese is also spoken in former Portuguese colonies. And then we have more recently advanced to French and Italian. So what I'm trying to say is with that, automatically, we address a very diverse set of audience. And what we discovered, as a matter of fact, one other thing that came about in terms of diversity is when we introduced programs in other languages other than English, we also found that we increased our female participation. In STEM courses, generally, the female participation in the United States is around 25%, and we wanted it at least to reach that internationally, but much more than that. As a matter of fact, we've achieved that because there were a lot of females that weren't given opportunity in those countries, and they certainly weren't as familiar with English as their male counterparts were. So when we introduced programs in their own languages, suddenly the interest shot up, and it has brought about an amazingly diverse result, actually resulting in greater innovation. So that's really what it is. So while we introduced gender diversity, we also brought about greater innovation.
Well, I know gender diversity potentially means more enrollment in these programs for MIT, but on the other hand, inclusion of women, what about the benefits of that, the ripple effects in other countries around the world?
Well, as they say in a lot of places, when you educate women, you're educating really the whole family. And so it has a trickle-down effect. But more than that, the fact is that more and more women are joining the workforce in areas that really were previously reserved for men, or at least thought that way. That is no longer true. But then if there are impediments, we're supposed to take down those impediments so that they're able to then not only be at parity with men, but in fact excel in so many ways. So therefore, what you're seeing is we are, with our courses, are allowing them to acquire the skills that they did not have previously, because in fact, language was an impediment. We took that out. And we also encourage the fact that we welcome them, and we form groups where they're project groups, they execute different projects, that we deliberately mix men and women and kind of bring about more innovative results so that people can see it in action rather than just in theory.
Well, one thing about diversity and multiculturalism, you can't go too far with one size fits all. Something that we think is inclusive in the United States might be intrusive somewhere else. If you had to deal with this, let's say in Saudi Arabia or Dubai, you want women to participate in some project around government innovation, you got to be careful. How did you manage that?
Well, and you're absolutely right. You can't just say, well, these are our principles, these are our values, and you shall fall in line. I mean, that's if they would call it imperialistic thinking. And no, that's not what you want to do. What you want to do is to allow them to understand that there's a value attached to what we think and explain it to them. Here's what happened in both Saudi Arabia as well as the UAE that you talked about. Both places understood intrinsically that they needed to have more women participate in decision making in terms of positions of power and so on and so forth, but that the pervasive culture or the local culture wasn't going to allow that. So they needed a catalyst. They needed some form of putting pressure on the system. And And who better than a respected academic institution? So in other words, what I'm saying is if I had just walked in as an individual, not representing MIT, I probably would have been thrown out. But on the other hand, when you represent MIT, which is a very respected institution, and it says that you will probably have much more benefit if you do the following, why don't we try it out? They were willing to take your bet. And in fact, see if they could do it. Now, we knew deep down also that the organizers were very supportive of us. So it wasn't as if we came up with the idea and we said, let's just do it. We gained their permission and they gave it to us to say, you would be able to actually do it while others would not necessarily be accepted. And quite frankly, that is exactly what happened. The results we brought about were really quite tremendous.
I know your program is very focused on innovation, but it sounds as if there's something here that could be applied even to local institutions and local government, I guess. And it's the importance of who's in the room when decisions are made. What would you tell people?
Well, we truly believe that diversity breeds innovation. And it's not just a slogan. It really is bringing about the fact that different perspectives brought to the table allow you to understand that, in fact, there are multiple ways of skinning a cat, if you will, or advancing yourself. And if you didn't have those voices there, then you would have like-minded people making a decision and quite satisfied with it. And then when you try to implement it in a diverse community and you find all kinds of obstacles and you say, wait a minute, we never thought about that. Well, you didn't have them on the table to have a discussion with. So you want diversity when you are thinking of ideas, when you're thinking about developing systems, when you're thinking about developing technologies or products, you need them there so that what comes out is then therefore implementable on a wider scale and the acceptance level is high. And you've also thought about some of the idiosyncrasies that may be attached to certain cultures. So that is really, the inclusiveness is not just because it's a nice thing to do. It actually brings about much better results for all.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time to be with us. Again, congratulations.
Thank you very much, Chris. And it was nice being with you.
Nice to meet you too. Bhaskar Pant from MIT Professional Education. We'll have more news in just a moment.